he started talking? There is no way in Athens.
He's not even at the podium.
He was a second ago.
Oh, maybe I started talking. Wow. Oh, yes. Okay, that's bad. Should we tell him?
He's like doing this thing.
He has one of those glasses that
Oh my gosh, I love this.
that have the magnet in the middle. Should I say something?
I guess so.
Dr. Duke, we can't hear you in Augusta if you're talking.
What's happening in Augusta? Don't have the slides yet?
We were just saying we couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay, I haven't said anything yet.
Oh, okay, sounds
I'm just
good.
starting now. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Just getting started. I did wear my St. Patrick's tie today. I have to think ahead on that. St. Patrick's Day will be passed by the time we get back together. All of you here in Savannah, and I think most of you around the state know that's a big
Sunday.
deal in Savannah.
Second Sunday is spring
Any,
break.
any kind of, any
Oh,
local
it is a big deal
broadcast
in
that's come
Savannah.
on
That
for the
makes
last
sense.
3
They were
weeks.
worried about it in Savannah.
In Savannah, they give a countdown as far as how many days, hours, and minutes until St. Patrick's. It's kind of falling, it falls at different times. Sometimes it interferes with our schedule otherwise. And we actually had an exam on that day. The first year we had students down here, it was a management exam. And the students asked me, and I told them they would have to talk to Dr. May, but we know Dr. May's a good guy. He actually let them take the exam at a different time. Only because it's a real bad traffic problem here in Savannah.
Yeah,
Some of them that live downtown said they just weren't sure they were going to be able to make it in that day because of the
Just
traffic.
can't make it in for the whole master's.
And he like,
Yeah.
he gave points for creativity on that, and he let
And we
them
have
take
like
it.
3 tests that week. We have two,
But this
two
year,
tests
no
next
excuses.
week,
It's
I
on the
think.
weekend. Hopefully
We
good
have the
weather.
ball final. Oh, it's not a test.
It's an
it's a
interesting
meeting.
thing to attend. Huge gathering down by the
Since I'll
river.
be just leaving it in my car here.
Okay. Just to kind of catch us up on the schedule, again, y'all are all off next week. You've got all the notes for our exam. The next class meeting, class time for us will be Tuesday, the following week, and that will be an exam. We won't actually meet live again after today until the exam. You have all the notes, you have kind of the book in there as far as when the notes in it for the exam 1, when they in for exam 2, it'll be material in between that. The final will be comprehensive, but this one won't be comprehensive. And so it'll just cover that material. Realize it will be slightly shorter. It'll be an 80-point exam because 20 points of that is going to come from your IPE, which we're still waiting to find out when those are going to be scheduled. And I will be following up with Dr. Fagan real soon. I think the only one that's scheduled for sure is Augusta. And hopefully we'll have those others. You will get the 20 points, one way or the other, as long as you participate in the IPE event when it's scheduled. So what I usually do on that one anyway, I go ahead and report it as if it's based on 100 because it blows everybody's mind to get an exam based on 80. So I'll follow up with you about that after the exam. It will be based on 100 points, although the questions will only cover 80 points. That'll be Tuesday week, and we'll meet again 2 weeks from today for live class. And I'm going to press on as long as I can today. I'm sure it sounds strange on other campuses. It doesn't hurt, but it sounds painful for me to talk. And if you have trouble hearing me, let me know, and I can crank up the volume in other places. I can't do anything about that. But anyway, where we left off last time, we were talking about substations. We did talk a little bit last time about the state legislature and how this is a very important week. Actually, today is a very important day. It's crossover day. Anything that doesn't pass out of the House that it was, or the chamber that it was introduced in, the House bill has to pass the House, the Senate bill has to pass the Senate, or they basically don't deal with it anymore for this term of the legislature. A couple of other pharmacy bills are still waiting, hoping to get crossed over, as they call it, crossover day. today. One very interesting thing I heard on the news last night, the bill to allow the cultivation and production of THC oil actually passed the House. And some people may not be as surprised as I am. Having been in Georgia for a number of years, I wasn't sure we were ever going to see that happen. But doesn't mean it's law yet. And realize that may be something you hear from some of your friends out there that aren't as, because it's big news. You know, passes the House of Representatives in the state of Georgia. That's only halfway, maybe not even halfway there. It's still got to pass the Senate, and there's often some compromises and some back and forth. If the Senate feels like they need to change anything, they have to send it back to the House. Again, we've only got 10 legislative days left after this time today, so we'll see. But that's kind of interesting that it may or may not pass through there. We're going to talk about manufacturing permits, and I'm very interested to see if this ends up being categorized as a manufacturer, pharmaceutical manufacturer. You know, it's in kind of a gray area. That may be one of the first areas that the Board of Pharmacy gets involved in medical marijuana, because we are actually going to, if this passes the Senate, it gets signed by the governor, so they've got to go through all those steps. The actual growing, cultivation, growing, and production of THC oil may just come to pass in the state of Georgia. Okay. We were finishing up with substations. I kind of gave you a little sample scenario there. Another one that we use sometimes, you know, there's a CVS pharmacy in downtown Athens now, but as far as I know, it still doesn't have a pharmacy in it. You can't go in there and drop off your prescription, go pick it back up there, because it does not have a pharmacy permit. So again, substations are not allowed for distribution of prescriptions, even though it sounds like a good idea. It might give you more access to patients, more customers for your pharmacy, and maybe even improve compliance. But if it's done with the purpose of preventing you from having to have an actual pharmacy permit, it's not allowed to be done. Continuing on with the Code of Professional Conduct, the pharmacy rules and regs. And again, realize this is, you know, the way you look at some of it, it's like a stick where they're going to beat a pharmacist with that stick if they do something wrong. But it also gives some teeth to the idea that they are trying to protect the professional pharmacist. This next thing is definitely that way. It's referred to as independent judgment. There should be nothing done to interfere with the professional judgment and skills of pharmacists. This wasn't as big a deal when we all kind of worked for ourselves, had our own independent drugstores, things like that. That's been a long, long time ago. Now most pharmacists are employees who work for another entity, and sometimes they think they have some say-so over what we're doing. And one way or another, realistically, they do, as far as controlling your job. But this gets pulled up quite a bit when corporate policy or even pharmacy store managers who maybe aren't pharmacists try to tell the pharmacist, you know, you need to make this patient, this customer happy and do what they're telling you to do. And if you feel like it's not appropriate as far as the practice of pharmacy, this is where the State Board of Pharmacy backs you up. The problem is the State Board of Pharmacy isn't paying your salary. So again, you know, I'm trying to cover all the basics here. Realize you are protected by this, and you should, you know, be able to stand up and do what's right by the profession. But the practicality of all of it is you have to take into consideration, you know, who you're working for and what the repercussions might be. Return of prescription drugs, this kind of makes sense. We should not knowingly return to stock any dispensed medication. The question is, what is the dispensed medication? Once you put it in a prescription bottle and put it out front for that patient to pick it up, that patient picks it up, signs for it, walks out the door, has it for 10 minutes or 10 days, and then brings it back in and says, you know, I don't want to use this, or I'm not going to use this, I'd like to get my money back. That's where it gets tricky, okay? And again, it kind of goes into that independent judgment thing right before this. Many stores, many retail operations run under the philosophy of the customer is always right. And if the customer doesn't want this and brings it back, you know, you need to give them their money back. This backs you up saying that I cannot take that back into stock, and then, you know, therefore, you know, the money's been spent, I've dispensed this drug to you, you've taken it out of here, I'm not going to be able to give you credit for that. You have legal background to say that, again, with most of us working for other companies now, frequently the company we work for wants to make that person happy. They say, no, give them their money back. And that's a business decision. They can definitely do that. They're basically going to eat that. But you do not want to put that drug back into the stock bottle or in any way dispense it again to another patient. And this goes for things that require to have special storage requirements. Those very expensive insulin pens come all packaged up. If you look at it and tell, this hasn't been opened. But you have no idea, you cannot verify the storage conditions for that. So again, this is to back you up for a professional practice of pharmacy. And whether you decide to credit it or not, can be a business decision, but you can't return that medication to stock. If we wanted to track that further down the ethics track, you won't that necessarily today, but say you give that patient their money back, those patients, it's already been billed to their third parties. A lot of times they have no idea, but you're giving them their $30 back for their copay or whatever it might be. What do you do about reversing the charge on that insurance charge? Well, again, it's really easy to say, especially in a classroom setting, ethically, we need to reverse that charge. But once again, you've got medication here that you dispense, and you can't put it back in the stock. It's one thing to eat a $10 or $20 copay. It's another thing to eat $300 or $400 worth of medication costs. So again, that may be part of the discussion you have to have with your store manager who doesn't understand the pharmacy side of it. But and then of course there's always the option of not reversing it. If you get audited, not that you should only consider if you get audited or not, but realize that's insurance fraud. You dispense that medication, you get taking it back and give the patient credit for it. Okay, there are provisions for the return and reuse. We've talked a little bit about this before, the packaging requirements for unit dose. Remember, appropriate unit dose packages. Again, if you can verify their storage conditions and things like this can be returned to stock. That's one of the main purposes of the unit dose product, used either in a health system, pharmacy, a hospital, or in long-term care facilities and things like that. We're going to hit that again as we come across that section in the Board of Pharmacy Regulation. Definitely remember those multi-drug packages, which are being used increasingly. It's a great patient service. It's something to help compliance. They sell it to patient caregivers. They sell it to patient's families. Saying your mom or your dad or your person you're taking care of is going to be able to have their medications taken better and more appropriately if you use this multi-dose packaging. But once you have mixed those things in a multi-dose package, you can't pop them out of there and put them back in stock. Okay? Because the problem there is cross-contamination of other products. Who's to say the next patient that you might dispense that to might have a sensitivity or shouldn't be exposed to the product that you just put back into that stock bottle. Okay. The next one is entitled Invasion of the Code of Professional Conduct. You're not supposed to invade the Code of Professional Conduct. You should go by the rules and the regs and the ethical concepts. This is where they also say in there that knowledge or lack of knowledge of what is the law is not an excuse. So even if it's something that you're like, I don't know, can't think I ever covered that. And that one on my MPJE, I didn't know that was not allowed. If you're evading the professional conduct or the rules and regs of the Board of Pharmacy, otherwise, they will prosecute you on that. Okay, we mentioned before refusal to fill, and it is a big deal. If you would like to, if you have time, something to do on spring break, look up conscience clause, pharmacy, and you can see cases all around the country where pharmacists went for one reason or another, did not fill a prescription for a patient, got into some kind of altercation, the patient took it to court, and may have won a settlement against the pharmacist or the pharmacy, but even bigger is that some states have started rescinding this portion of their law. Excuse me. And they've taken out the conscience clause, saying that your conscience can't be used. You have to dispense based on your professional training and getting the right medication for the patient. Georgia specifically doesn't refer to this in the law as a conscience clause, but that is the conscience clause for the state of Georgia. The big deal here is that it shall not be considered unprofessional conduct to refuse to fill based on professional judgment, feel like the medication is incorrect, the dose is incorrect, ethical or moral beliefs. That's actually in the law in Georgia. So it's very powerful, but you also have to be very careful about how you apply that. Again, these things have been taken away in other states. It actually gives us a lot of leeway there as far as how we practice pharmacy in the state of Georgia. But we need to be very careful about how we do that and not abuse it to the point where we step over the line and prevent somebody from being able to use that type of determination in the future. If you do anything that's not allowed under this professional conduct, they can give you all types of reprimands, revoke your license, put you on probation, fine you, all these different things. It's up to the discretion of the board. It's not like the drug regulations that basically say if you have a Control 2 substance violation, here are the judgments that a judge or a court can place against you. They pretty much give full power to the Board of Pharmacy. As far as repetition of these things, they will go from lesser punishment to greater punishment if you're brought in on these things for multiple times. And again, as we mentioned early on, I think day one of the class, the purpose of this professional conduct code, as well as the purpose of the Board of Pharmacy in the state of Georgia, is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the state of Georgia and to protect the profession. Okay? Not to protect an individual pharmacist necessarily, especially not if they're doing the wrong thing. So the board's not there to try to say, hey, this person's a pharmacist and we should give some consideration. No, they're going to come down and be hard because they don't want what a pharmacist does is not along the lines of the rules and regs to affect other pharmacists who are doing the right thing. So that comes in there several times. Again, just like your driver's license, it is a privilege, and it does have some vested rights. You can't get it unless you have satisfied numerous things like completing an accredited college of pharmacy, taking the boards, all those things. There are some rights by being a pharmacist that you're allowed to do, or with medication, to work in a pharmacy in the state of Georgia. But it is revocable for cause, and as hard as you work to get it, you want to work just as hard. It's not totally that hard to work hard afterwards and keep it. But realize that once you lose that, it's very difficult to get that back. One of the areas, and again, I mentioned this a number of times, I know y'all get quite a bit of this in pharmacy school now, as far as talking about addiction and addiction management, and specifically impaired pharmacy practitioners. Georgia actually is pretty progressive on this, and they do have a mechanism where pharmacists who do get in trouble do all these things that they talk to us about in those classes as far as addiction management, where a pharmacist can actually surrender their license, work with the board and the pharmacist program to come up with a plan on how they would get themselves back to be fit to practice and get their pharmacy license back. And this, again, as I mentioned before, is something that the Board of Pharmacy spends an exorbitant amount of time. Anybody that's on the Board of Pharmacy, talk to them about it, ask them, what it's like to be on the Board of Pharmacy. And pretty quickly, they're going to say, I can't believe how much time we have to spend dealing with pharmacists who are impaired. Realize it does apply to interns and externs being that term that they use for students who are still in school, on your IPPEs, on your APPEs. This is just time that the college is involved in coordinating your training, but you are still practicing under that internship license. And we do have, unfortunately, every year, students who do get in trouble prior to getting their pharmacy degree. They may have to go before the board, they have to make some concessions as far as when they're going to get their license. The board has, of course, the duty and authority to remove them from practice. This is a very, very important part right here. And it says any other board licensee. That would be all the rest of us practicing pharmacy in the state. We have an obligation to notify the board that these persons, that we're working with these persons. Okay? This is something that I think a lot of people in practice either don't know or have forgotten. I do bring it up periodically when I'm talking to students or pharmacists who are asking me questions about situations they have gotten into or people they know, that they're saying, you had a partner that was such and such and such and such and such and such. And I'm always glad to talk to them, but I always remind them that you realize that you have an obligation as a pharmacist. If what you're describing to me is happening, you have an obligation to report that to the board, usually through your GD and A agent. And it's very firm in there that if the person does not report that and knows it, and there ends up being some repercussions down the road, they can actually come back and seek, some possibly fine or probation and things like that, saying you knew this and you allowed this to go on, endanger the public health. So keep that in mind. As you're working with people, even now, realizing that that's an obligation you have, practicing pharmacy in the state of Georgia, to pass that information on and make sure that it gets appropriately handled by the GD&A and Board of Pharmacy. For violations, just in general, again, the powers of the board, they can put a fine on you up to not more than $25,000. The idea here is that may be punitive and try to get you not to do it again, but it is usually set to offset the price of the investigation or the prosecution. And it could definitely go on beyond that. If they turn it over to the Attorney General, then of course they can bring the full power of the court system in the state of Georgia, all the punishment associated by them. So again, the best way is to keep your nose clean, stay out of that situation. They do always want me to include the cost may be fixed by the board, but it's payable to the state. They don't generate their own funds. Okay? Board of Pharmacy has a budget and it's relatively small. They don't get to do more or stay in nicer hotels because they have put out more fines. Okay? So that part of it's out of it. They're not finding based on the needs to run the Board of Pharmacy. That money goes to the state, just like any other fine for criminal activity. Okay. So again, those things are very important in practice of pharmacy. It's harder to test you on those. It's harder to come up with like an ABCD type question, so you may see fewer of those on the final exam. But realize it is very important to practice pharmacy, and it's more important to know these things than it is just to get a good grade on the exam. Okay, going on into part 2, and just to give you a little bit of idea on this, I think you can see on there that previous one had 40-something slides, this one had 57 slides, just to kind of give you an idea of where we are in the semester. We've got 2 more sections of slides to go. Now the next section is actually over 100 slides, okay, but if you look at where we are in the Board of Pharmacy regulations, a lot of that stuff that we've covered before, we'll go through it pretty quick. But we do go through a lot of slides between now and the end of the semester. The last one's, I think, only about 40. This one's 57. But what I've done on this, because again, a lot of this is repetition of things we've covered, is I've tried to use the big bold blue here. Not that that's the only thing that's important, but these are the most important things. So when you're going back through these notes and saying, oh my gosh, I got 200 slides to go here. And it's comprehensive. Realize that the new things, or the things that are most important here, I have tried to highlight in blue the kind of key of that. So look at them on your computer so you can see the blue, not have to print expensive slides. Okay, what we're going to do now, and again, we're going right down to the Board of Pharmacy rules and regs. We talked about what you had to have what it took to be on the Board of Pharmacy. We talked about the requirements to be a pharmacist and the licensing requirements as far as exams and things like that. Next thing in the progression there are pharmacy licenses. And there's a number of different ones. Okay? One of the most recent ones added was a non-resident pharmacy permit, and that's only been on the books for a couple of years. Basically, it just says that they're the same requirements as in-state pharmacy, but they're not necessarily going to go out there and inspect your pharmacy. You have to be in good standing with the Board of Pharmacy in whatever state you're in. And this was done at the same time we adopted some mail order pharmacy rules, because prior to that time, we didn't allow mail order pharmacy to operate in the state of Georgia, and basically the Board of Pharmacy had their blinders on and said, we're not, we don't believe in mail order pharmacy, we're not going to regulate it. Well, eventually they came around to the idea that it was responsible to regulate mail order pharmacy, not that there were going to be that many in the state of Georgia, And I've always had a problem with that, and kind of taking that out as a career opportunity to most of you, because there's only like, I think, one really large mail order pharmacy, and then some that are associated with the HMOs in the Atlanta area. Whereas all the states around us have had mail order pharmacy practice for many, many years. They basically have large mail order pharmacy dispensing areas that are, it's not for everybody, just like no particular practice of pharmacy is great for everybody, but some people like working in that environment. They're not going to come to Georgia because they already have these big things operating outside of the state. But now that they have allowed that to occur in the state, and the other part of it, the part they were really ignoring, was the fact of how many of the citizens of the state of Georgia were having their prescriptions filled by out-of-state mail-order pharmacies. Okay? That was part of their responsibility, protect the citizens of the state of Georgia, protect the profession of pharmacy. Well, here are all these patients, including, some of your parents, some of my parents, to get their prescriptions via mail order. They're coming from out of state. They had no say-so over it at all. So it kind of went hand in glove with them accepting the idea of mail order practice in the state of Georgia to say we're also going to regulate any out-of-state pharmacies. That's where the non-resident part comes, without saying out-of-state. We're going to regulate them, and they have to apply and pay for a license. Okay? They have that application fee, and they have to re-up their license every 2 years. So again, the money didn't go to the Board of Pharmacy, but it did go to the state of Georgia. And any pharmacy operating outside of the state that wants to mail prescriptions into the state of Georgia through their mail order program has to have a valid non-resident permit in the state of Georgia. We talked a little bit about the specifics as far as compounding in the state of Georgia. Again, a lot of states have that kind of middle ground where pharmacists can do large-scale compounding, and they can voluntarily register with the FDA. Again, we said that cannot occur in Georgia. So if they're a compounding pharmacy, they have to indicate compliance with Georgia regulations. In other words, they can't be an outsourcer, because we don't recognize the outsourcing compounding level. And they must submit a copy or show that they have a copy of their last inspection current within 2 years. This is to make sure that places like the Massachusetts Compounding Pharmacy cannot be in operation in other states and be sending their prescriptions into the state of Georgia like they were doing before they got stopped and caught for all the people that they had killed with some contaminated injectable drugs. Okay, so 2 parts to that. First of all, any of them that send mail order prescriptions in the state of Georgia have to have a valid non-resident permit, and they have to comply with the compounding restrictions in Georgia. They can't be one of these large-scale compounders or outsourcers because Georgia doesn't recognize that. Georgia would require them to have a manufacturer permit. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Okay, that was the most recent new type. That's why I spent a little bit more time on that. We're going to talk about each of these briefly. These are other permit types in Georgia. Manufacturing permit, wholesale distributor license, research permit, and reverse distributor license. We've mentioned most of these types, including especially the reverse distributor already. So again, this is just kind of check off the specifics as far as those license requirements in the state of Georgia. Manufacturer permit. Remember, that's the type you have to have if you're going to do large-scale compounding. You can either be a manufacturer or you can be a compounding pharmacy, but you prepare batches of things that are sent to someone else for resale and things like that. You can't do that under just a regular pharmacy permit in Georgia. You have to have a manufacturer permit. These are all pretty standard. Anytime you have a change in ownership, change the way you do business, or change your location, you have to notify the board. That's so they can come find you for where you are. All of these licenses basically have a 2-year term, just like pharmacist license and pharmacy licenses. Remember, we said the pharmacist license is every 2 years, due on even years, and these are on odd years. Not really a testable event, but it's just to try to help you keep up with the fact that something is probably coming due just about every year, especially if you're a PIC. You've got to be worried about your pharmacy permit and your DEA permit along with your pharmacist license. Okay, here's the big difference, or a major difference in a manufacturing permit. Similar to what it would require if you had an FDA permit to manufacture drugs, but the Board of Pharmacy has this privilege in the state of Georgia. If you have a manufacturer permit, they can require you to submit a sample of the products that you make for testing, to make sure that it verifies that what you say it's labeled as is actually what's in that product. You don't send that in automatically, it's just that it's, on request. But, and again, believe me, the Board of Pharmacy is not really interested in having to do a lot of this. But they're trying to set the bar high enough where it's really not, something that you're gonna have a lot of, and that's part of why we don't have so many manufacturers in the state of Georgia. Again, I'm kind of interested to see what's gonna happen with this THC oil. And it's gonna, again, depend on what it's categorized as. Right now, it's categorized as a C1 pharmaceutical. Well, they start manufacturing that in the state of Georgia, unless DEA changes the category of that, it's going to be a controlled substance. And somebody that's going to cultivate it and manufacture it, I think it's going to have to go through the Board of Pharmacy. We'll see how that works out. I'll realize it doesn't have to be a controlled substance. You can be a manufacturer of controlled substances or non-controlled substances. The state of Georgia is considered dangerous drugs. Happen to be dangerous just means they require a prescription and they're not controlled substances. As with pretty much handling any kind of pharmacy, you've got to keep an inventory. You definitely have to have your inventory available to GDNA. I realize GDNA, as the enforcement arm of the Board of Pharmacy, will come and inspect you and has the responsibility to keep up with all that. They do respect the idea that some manufacturers either have processes or ingredients, possibly flavoring agents or something like that. It's not specific to the product. They're considered trade secrets, and they do try to work to protect trade secrets. But other than that, you do have to be able to submit to them samples of the products you make. In addition, it does say that you will comply with all FDA GMP regulations, which is a whole different level of tracking your ingredients and their storage conditions and how things are manufactured. Again, very different than what we're allowed to do as a compounding pharmacy. A lot of records to keep for that too, but not nearly as much as that GMP, good manufacturing practices requirements, which are always changing and tightening up at a federal level.
Dr. Duke,
Question?
I just had a question about, you were saying THC oil. Is it THC oil or is it CBD oil? I wasn't able to find it online.
Okay, it's the THC, it's called low THC oil that actually has gotten passed through the House in the current legislature. But it's a great point to make as far as, I think there's actually some intentional poor marketing being done out there with these companies that are selling CBD oil and cannabidiol oil, which if it's true CBD oil, it's derived from hemp. And again, has no measurable or no practical amount, no hallucinogenic effect, and has a very low concentration, 0.3%. Yeah, less than 0.3% of THC, basically no active component of that. But what is being talked about right now in the legislature is this medical marijuana, which has been, legal for several years now, and it's a limited percentage of THC oil that can be used prescribed by prescribers who are certified to prescribe it, and they issue a card to people who possess it. Right now, if they're in possession of a relatively small amount of that, they will not be prosecuted. But they have to have that card, and it can only be people that have already been certified. So yeah, the CBD oil is a whole different ballgame, unless it's not. Again, the problem with CBD oil is people label things as CBD oil that may or may not be what we're talking about technically as far as something that contains essentially no measurable THC. And it has to do with its source coming from industrial hemp versus coming from the marijuana plant. We can talk about that not long ago. Unfortunately, it's not really a law situation because it's not controlled by the Board of Pharmacy in the state of Georgia. So did that help answer your question there and not totally confuse you?
Yeah, so basically you're saying it has a little bit more THC in it than the CBD oil, but it's still a limited amount. Is that correct?
Yes, it's still a limited amount. I think it started out at 5%, now it's no more than 3% THC, but that's a whole lot more THC than is allowed, or it would be as a byproduct of CBD. CBD should not have any added THC in it at all. but you will get a little bit of THC, not enough to get a pharmacological effect from industrial hemp. But the cultivar of the plant that's used for producing marijuana, whether it's recreational use or medical marijuana, has a much higher, it's been cultivated to have a higher percent of THC. It's still cannabis. And that, again, I don't want to keep talking until I confuse you completely, but that is part of the confusion process of all this, is, what's the difference? There is a difference. Marijuana plants have a much higher form, and it's that hallucinogenic effect, THC, that is what the drug-seeking behavior people want to have. Okay. And again, if we get through all these notes and don't want to talk about stuff like that, I would love to. There's actually going to be a grand rounds in a few weeks, and I'll let you know about it. One of your faculty, our faculty members in Augusta, and Office Always, is actually a pediatric specialist in Augusta.
What did he call her?
Not
It's
They will one of
Okasawa,
the
right?
hospitals that has been using medical
I don't know if you
marijuana
said her name right.
for research purposes, really for quite a number of years. But they were also one of the ones that did the clinical trials for Epidiolex. the recent
Oh, now I was
product
talking about your
that
thing,
approved
Bill. You should be
and
like,
is
actually, I
responsible
know
for having
that
the
dialect.
DEA approve
Let me tell
that
you.
particular product, which was initially registered as a controlled one substance. Basically, to prevent it from being used at all, only for research purposes. They moved it all the way to a C5. And she and her clinicians in Augusta have been using it. So she's going to talk about that, and it'll be very interesting. I'll let you know about that, and we'll talk about that as we can. Okay, wholesaler distributor. I think everybody understands what a wholesaler is, realize that there are some special requirements here because they are providing not only supplies that are used in pharmacies, but also the drugs that are sold in pharmacies. So it does include drugs and drug samples, but it also includes purchase of blood and blood components. I'm not going to really test you or hold you responsible for any difference in that, but realize anything that requires has that federal caution on it, requires dispensing through pharmacies, through the health system, can be dispensed or can be sourced through the wholesaler. About the only time this comes into play in a regular day in, day out pharmacy, we've talked a little bit, even back when we talked about the Form 222, how a pharmacy can distribute, just like they're buying from a wholesaler and they're allowed to possess it because of their DEA permit. Again, I don't want to limit it to just controlled substances, but because we can possess it, we can not only dispense it on prescriptions, we can actually transfer that to other pharmacies legitimately. If they need that, if they don't have it, we can transfer that within our pharmacy. If it's a C2, it's got to have a Form 222 that goes along with it. But if it's a non-C2 or it's just a dangerous drug in general, we can sell that to another pharmacy. That's allowed for a retail pharmacy in the state of Georgia. But we have what's called the 5% rule. If you get to where you're doing that a lot, if you're in a rural area and you're going to kind of act as the local wholesaler, if you act like a wholesaler to the point where 5% of your dosage units, and people love to debate this, it's not dollar volume, it's not tablet volume, it's dosage units. But if you just start doing this on a regular basis to the point where more than 5% of your dosage unit inventory is being dispensed to another pharmacy instead of being dispensed directly to patients, you automatically trigger the need to have a wholesale distributor license. So basically, just don't get into this big time if you're fine. If you're doing it on an occasional basis, the supply of drugs is in shortage in the area you're in, people aren't able to get it through other sources, they want to make that option available to you. But if you go over 5% of your total dosage units, you have to have a wholesale distributor license. Okay? Otherwise, you're dispensing via prescription. Compounding versus manufacturer, again, the key component for compounding is that it's a prescription for a patient. You've got that patient-prescriber-pharmacist relationship. As long as you're doing it that way, keep the state happy, and you can keep doing your compounding on a prescription-specific basis. You can't dispense for office use, and you sure can't compound it and sell it to other pharmacies for them to dispense it. Okay? Or then you get into being a manufacturer. Too many here. The big deal here is that this is for places, wholesalers that supply pharmacies in Georgia, if they happen to be in South Carolina or down in Florida, but they're dispensing, they're supplying as a wholesale distributor of pharmacies in Georgia, they gotta have a wholesaler distributor license in Georgia. Okay? Kind of goes back to when we talk about practitioners and how, you kind of get a little wary when you start getting prescriptions from out-of-state prescribers. And I said that frequently, those people that practice a lot in Jacksonville or in North Augusta, they're also going to have licenses in Georgia. You may have to find that out, allay your concern. But basically, this is a requirement that wholesalers, if they're going to ship drugs into the state of Georgia, they got to have a Georgia wholesaler license. Again, because they're a commercial operation, they have to comply with commercial zoning. You can't set up a drug wholesaler in your garage and start supplying hospitals and pharmacies in the area with drugs that way that can get you for commercial zoning violations if you have zoning regs. Again, it's a 2-year term. Most of the pharmacy and facility type licenses are on odd years because they got all those pharmacist licenses processed on even years. And again, I'm not going to ask you which ones are odd and which ones are even. I'm just telling you that so that you realize they're trying to kind of make it where it's easier to keep up with those types of things. And another thing that is unique to a wholesale distributor, again, we're going to talk about reverse distributors, but any wholesaler who sends drugs out may be required to take drugs back. If they dispensed it, if they've distributed it, we'll say, as a wholesaler to a pharmacy, and that pharmacy says, this is expired, or for one reason or another, we don't want this anymore, it's been open, excuse me, things like that, it can be returned to your wholesaler, and but they must have a quarantine area to make sure that doesn't end up back in the distribution cycle. Okay? So anything that's damaged, misbranded, adulterated, out of date, they have to have a separate area for that. And a few places that I've been to that have wholesale licenses, usually they call it the cage. It'll be part of the big warehouse, but does not have to have a whole separate different control system. They'll have a wire cage with doors locked and things like that on it. And that's the quarantine. You put things in there, nobody's gonna be filling orders, late at night, ready for the next morning run and say, we don't have any here, but I saw some of that over there. I'll go get it out of that other area. You got to make sure they can't mistakenly re-dispense those things. Okay. Again, storage conditions. There are much tighter controls on these wholesaler warehouses. They have to have temperature recording instruments so that they can verify that these drugs have not been stored in an unsafe condition. Okay, here's something the drug wholesaler has to do to keep up with you and your pharmacy. There's a trigger point based on the amount of drugs you purchase, that if you start buying controlled substances of a larger percentage of your total purchases, it triggers something in their computer system, and they have to report that to the Georgia Board of Pharmacy. Okay? And I made the mistake one day of asking a very good friend who's on the GNA, I said, what is that point? He looked at me and said, I can't tell you, you don't need to know. So this is kind of a trade secret, and again, I know it's got to be a bigger issue, especially with more and more drugs, particularly hydrocodone combination products going C2. There's some allotment of a traditional pharmacy that you can have your purchases over a month period of time in controlled 2 substances. And many pharmacies have kind of figured that out. Now, based on when they hit that point, in their month cycle of not being able to order any more C2s. So you can kind of figure it out, but again, it's not public information as far as how much that is. But do realize that's a responsibility of wholesalers to keep up with that. And if you start exceeding that on a regular basis, it gets reported up the line. That's part of their licensing requirements. Frequently, there will be a story in the news about many times it's a chain drugstore who gets in trouble for excessive controlled substances, and they cite a particular store or number of stores in a city. I'm thinking of several of these, and they were down in Florida. I'm trying not to make any specifics, but they will have a sanction against their license and their warehouse facility. It's under that same company's operation. And frequently it comes down to these types of things. It's because of that separate cycle that may be a wholesaler operating that warehouse or XYZ pharmacy. But they're sending things out to their stores, and at least in these cases where they've gotten in trouble and they've ended up paying millions of dollars in fines, and in some cases lost their DEA permit for a period of time, you can't run many large chain drugstores without having controlled substances. That pretty much shuts it down. But this has come up quite a bit. Again, usually it's a warehouse type distribution that's running their wholesaler for stores owned by that same company. And again, they can turn their head and aren't making these reports to the DEA or the state of Georgia, to the GDNA, they're going to come down on it. And again, they shut down these pharmacies and, for a period of time at least, even those warehouses. Okay, again, the old standard 2 years retention of records. The big blue here is copies of current licenses and permits of all customers. This is again something your wholesaler can hopefully do to help you. They will keep up with the fact that your license is coming up for renewal. They will keep up if you have a DEA permit. They're going to keep up with the fact your DEA permit is up for renewal. And hopefully, before they tell you they can't supply you any more controlled substances, they're going to say, hey, don't forget your DEA permit is good. But they have to have copies of all those licenses. So of course, you have to provide them to them, but they're going to request them of you. So that's just another thing that kind of helps you out as far as keeping up with the licenses you get. Cannot distribute outside of the U.S. except by written permission of the board. Basically, you don't want to get into that. Manufacturers certainly do manufacture and ship to other countries. Wholesalers, not so much. They're kind of in a separate category. Excuse me. And those products that they're selling have been produced for the U.S. market. And again, the problem is sending those to other places, and definitely they do not bring drugs in. Even if it's the same drug by the same manufacturer, they don't bring those in from other distribution cycles and put them back into use in the U.S. And that's kind of standard there. I think we can get through these last three. I'm about to fade out here talking to you, but as long as you can hear me, we're going to cover these last couple of permit types, and then we'll stop until our next class period. Researcher permit, again, the most frequent areas you're going to see this would be like in the College of Pharmacy, or definitely there in Augusta, at Augusta University or NCG, where you have researchers that are using products that aren't already approved for use as controlled substances, but they might be using C1s. They definitely had to have one of these at Augusta University, NCG, when they were doing the research on the Epidiolex. Again, this is done through the Georgia Board of Pharmacy. They have to fill out an application. They get an inspection. Again, in these cases, it's very, has to be very restrictive as far as access to those drugs. GDNA definitely does inspections there. This one, for some reason, is on even years. Not too many of those, but again, this is more of an individual type thing. The researcher permit specifies the researcher who can actually use this drug for the purposes of research. Let's see. I have some veiled threats here. Somebody's been a researcher and hasn't done their due diligence and kept up with their inventories and things in the past. That may come back to haunt them. They may not approve them to have the researcher permit in the future. Realize just because you have a multi-million-dollar grant to do this research on these products, unless you have the permit in the state where you're going to do it, you're not going to be able to do that research. It is very specific. In other words, if they can use medical marijuana or this Epidiolex product, cannabidiol, before it was had a brand name, it had to be very specific as far as what they were using it for. Its only approved indication is in the treatment of some refractory epilepsy, seizure disorders. And so they couldn't also get it and say, hey, we're going to look at these other indications that have been approved for use in even the state of Georgia. Things like PTSD and sickle cell disease and things like that. The research permit has to have not only that specific product, but actually how it's going to be used, and that has to be approved by the Board of Pharmacy. They're limited to only using it for that circumstance. Reverse distributor has got to be a pretty big deal. It's been around since 2001. We've talked about this quite a bit. I'm not going to talk too long about that. Again, it's required to have this if you're not even located in the state of Georgia. If you service pharmacies in the state of Georgia, you have to have a license by the Board of Pharmacy to be a reverse distributor. Where this comes into play more likely in your practice is you have somebody coming that's going to be your reverse distributor, saying, hey, we're going to help you with your inventory control. We're going to take all these out-of-date drugs. We're going to try to, get some credit for you back from the manufacturers and things like this. And we're actually going to, pay for ourselves by saving all this money for you. That may all sound well and good, but check their credentials, make sure they're actually licensed as a reverse distributor in the state of Georgia, or else they can't be taking anything out of your pharmacy. Okay? Definitely anything they do take out of your pharmacy, they need to give you a copy of that record. If it's a controlled 2 substance, it has to be transferred with a Form 222. So again, be very wary of somebody taking drugs that have been placed on your inventory out of your pharmacy. You need to have appropriate records to keep up with that. If they are only a reverse distributor, not also a wholesaler, they just happen to be exempt from the quarantine due to the fact that everything they have is quarantined. Okay? Their whole warehouse is a quarantine facility because they are only a reverse distributor. They are not a wholesaler, so there shouldn't be the problem of they're taking the drug back and getting it back in the supply chain. Okay, we'll stop at this slide. Credit for returned or expired drugs. This comes up frequently in practice. And I'm surprised sometimes when I go to different pharmacies and people say, oh, God, the drug's expired, and we've waited too long to get any credit back from the wholesaler. It's actually a law requirement in the state of Georgia that wholesalers provide a mechanism for return and give you either credit or replacement for expired drugs under certain circumstances. This is another good reason that you should check for expired drugs regularly on your shelves. And it actually includes full and partial containers. They don't usually give you credit. They don't usually give you money back for partial containers, but they have to give you some compensation, including consideration or credit for purchase of other products. If the drugs have been expired too long, or they're not able to give you credit for one reason or another, they must notify you within 30 days. Why? Or else you should expect that they're going to do something, give you credit or replacement. Now, this is only things you actually purchase from them. So if you ended up buying drugs, you have these people that call your pharmacies all the time, will give you a great price this week on this drug or that drug. Realize if you buy from them and also buy from your ABC wholesaler or whoever, that ABC wholesaler is not going to give you credit for drugs you buy from somebody else. And this is another reason to kind of stay loyal to your wholesaler. They are supposed to be working with you and giving you some options there as far as your inventory, keeping your inventory costs down. It must be in original containers and purchased from that source. That's what I was just talking about. But again, it can't be this thing that you would put back in other bottles or whatever. It needs to be in the original containers. And that gives them the chance to go back to the manufacturer, whoever they get it from, the bigger wholesaler, and possibly get some credit back from that. Okay, emergency service providers kind of changes the game here, so we'll stop there for today. We'll pick up for that on next Thursday. This is basically the EMTs and other ambulance service type things that are actually able to carry drugs that have not been specifically assigned to a particular patient, or things that aren't necessarily prescribed for a certain patient, but they can operate, especially the EMT, the ambulances and things like that we have now, without having those drugs available immediately. They can't wait till they get to the hospital to get the drugs. So there are special requirements there. A lot of times pharmacies, particularly hospital pharmacies, but even in rural areas of Georgia, independent pharmacies or chain drugstores might be the closest supplier of these drugs to resupply the EMT services. So there are some specific requirements here and things that you need to know about in order to have a relationship with these emergency service providers to kind of be their wholesaler, provide the medication that they need to have on there. Like I say, you never know. It might be you or a family member of yours that need that next dose of epinephrine or whatever they might have on that ambulance. So you want to make sure they have it and are storing it correctly. Okay, we'll stop there for today. And, have a great spring break. Have a good St. Patrick's Day. Good luck with your big reveal tomorrow, rotations, everybody will have some good experiences there. And, I'll be available if you have questions. If you do have to take your law notes, we can spring break, and start studying, you have questions, you can email me, and I'll be watching the email, I'll get back to you if you have questions. Don't feel like you gotta wait until next week. All right, have a good break.